"I'll give you 6 million if you can get them to walk," said the banker to the new nanny. Richard Thompson was desperate. The man who ran one of New York City's largest private banks found himself completely helpless in the face of a situation all his money couldn't fix. Emily Wilson could hardly believe what she had just heard. At 26, she had worked as a nanny in many family homes, but no one had ever offered her such an absurd amount. $6 million to get 3 babies walking again. The triplets Matthew, Michael, and Nathan, just 15 months old, had simply stopped taking their first steps 2 months ago. "You don't understand," said Richard, his voice trembling as he held Emily's arms in the middle of the pediatric therapy room of his penthouse. "My children used to walk just fine. They ran around the house, climbed on the sofa. They were as active as any other kids." Emily looked at the 3 little ones sitting on the rubber mat. Matthew, the most active before the problem, now only crawled on the floor. Michael sat there, rocking back and forth, while Nathan, the smallest of the 3, hid behind a pillow every time he heard his father's voice. "What exactly happened?" Emily asked, trying to stay calm in the face of the man's despair. Richard ran his hands through his graying hair. At 42, he looked like he had aged a decade in the last few months. "My ex-wife and I had a terrible fight, right here in this room. The children saw everything. Since then, they refused to stand." His voice broke as he spoke about the children. Emily sensed there was much more to the story. As an experienced childcare professional, she knew emotional issues could affect children's development in unexpected ways. "Have doctors been consulted?" Emily asked. "All the best specialists in New York City have examined my children. Neurologists, orthopedists, physical therapists. They all say the same thing. There's nothing physically wrong with them. It's like they decided to stop walking on their own." Emily knelt beside the triplets. Matthew looked at her curiously, but when she reached out to help him stand, he immediately threw himself to the floor and started crying. His cries set off the other 2, who began to whimper in distress. "See," Richard said, frustrated, "it's always like this. They just don't want to stand." At that moment, the apartment doorbell rang. Richard went to answer it and returned with a blonde, elegant woman, her face tight with anger. Emily immediately realized it was the ex-wife. "Jennifer, I told you this wasn't a good time," Richard said, clearly annoyed. "I don't care about your timing, Richard. I want to see my children," Jennifer replied, completely ignoring Emily's presence. As soon as Jennifer entered the room, something extraordinary happened. The 3 babies who had been crying instantly fell silent. But it wasn't a silence of relief. It was a silence of fear. Matthew quickly crawled under the coffee table, Michael threw himself face down on the floor, and Nathan began to tremble. "My babies," Jennifer said, trying to approach. The children reacted as if fleeing danger. They scrambled further away, some beginning to whimper softly, a cry of genuine fear. Emily watched the scene with professional focus. These children weren't just reacting to their mother's presence. They were reliving some trauma every time they saw their parents together in the same room. "Jennifer, you're scaring them," Richard said. "I'm scaring them. You're the one who yelled at me in front of them. You're the one who threw things across the room," Jennifer shot back, raising her voice. Immediately, the 3 babies began to cry desperately. It wasn't a normal child's cry. It was a cry of panic. Matthew tried to stand up to run, but his legs trembled and he fell. Michael started hyperventilating, and Nathan curled up so tightly it seemed he wanted to disappear. Emily moved quickly. In a very soft voice, she began to sing a lullaby she had learned from her grandmother. Slowly, the babies calmed down, but they remained on the floor, refusing to stand. "They need to leave the room," said Emily, looking at the couple. Now, Richard and Jennifer left, still arguing in the hallway. Emily was alone with the triplets, and for the first time she saw them relax a little. Matthew even managed a small smile when she made a funny face. During her first week of work, Emily noticed disturbing patterns. Whenever Richard raised his voice on the phone in his office, the children regressed. If he slammed a door, they startled. If someone visited the apartment and spoke loudly, the triplets crawled under the furniture. But the most revealing moment came on a Thursday. Emily was playing with Michael on the floor when Richard came home from work. The boy was almost managing to stand on his own when he heard his father's voice greeting the housekeeper in the kitchen. Immediately, Michael threw himself to the floor and began trembling. He was so close, Emily told Richard that night. But something scared him. What could it have been? I didn't even enter the room. Your voice. He heard your voice and got scared. Richard fell silent for a long moment. The truth was beginning to take shape in his mind, and he didn't like what he saw. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the second week, Emily received a call from the previous physical therapist, Dr. Sarah Johnson, who had abandoned the case. You need to know what you're getting into, Sarah said. That environment is toxic. The father yells, the mother yells, and those children live in a constant state of terror. No exercise or technique will work while they're afraid. Why did you leave the case? Emily asked. Because Richard refused to admit he was the problem. He wanted a magic solution, someone who could make his children walk without him having to change. I tried explaining childhood trauma, but he only wanted quick results. The conversation with Sarah helped Emily understand the scope of the challenge. It wasn't just about physical therapy or motor stimulation. It was about healing emotional scars in very young children. That afternoon, Emily decided to test something. She asked Richard to leave the apartment for a few hours. Alone with the triplets, she played soft music and created a completely calm environment. To her surprise, Michael managed to stand while holding onto the couch for nearly a minute. Nathan crawled faster than he had in weeks, and Matthew even attempted a step before sitting back down. When Richard returned, she showed him the videos she had recorded. They can do it. The problem isn't physical. Richard watched the videos in silence. Seeing his children move normally when he wasn't there felt like a punch to the gut. Are you saying I'm the problem? I'm saying they associate your presence with the trauma they've experienced. We need to work on that. But Richard wasn't ready to accept that truth. The next morning, he came home with 3 new professionals. Nannies specialized in child development, each with decades of experience. Starting today, each of my children will have their own dedicated nanny, he announced. I want results in 2 weeks. Emily was informed that she would only be an assistant, helping as needed. The first specialized nanny, Mrs. Harrison, was 60 years old and had cared for the children of diplomats. The second, Rebecca, had a degree in education and specialized in children with difficulties. The third, Stephanie, held an international certification in early childhood motor development. The apartment turned into a professional battleground. Each expert had her own method, her own philosophy, her own schedule. Mrs. Harrison believed in strict discipline. Rebecca wanted to apply sensory stimulation techniques. Stephanie advocated for structured exercises with specific equipment. Within days, the triplets were completely confused. Matthew cried constantly because Mrs. Harrison forced him to stand, even when he showed fear. Michael refused to eat because Rebecca had completely changed his feeding routine. Nathan developed an obsessive attachment to Emily, crying whenever she stepped away. This isn't working, Emily told Richard at the end of the first week. They're qualified professionals, they need more time. But time only made things worse. The 3 specialized nannies began competing with each other, each trying to prove her method was superior. Mrs. Harrison criticized Rebecca's techniques. Rebecca questioned Mrs. Harrison's rigidity. Stephanie dismissed them both, considering their approaches outdated. The triplets, already traumatized, now lived in chaos. There was no routine, no peace. The apartment was always in motion, with professionals coming and going, each giving different orders. Then Jennifer returned. She arrived one Friday afternoon with her lawyer, Dr. Benjamin Harris. Holding a camera, she began filming the scene. I want to document the conditions my children are living in, she declared. What she found was truly shocking. Mrs. Harrison was forcing Matthew to stand while he cried. Rebecca was trying to make Michael walk on an improvised treadmill, even though he was clearly terrified. Stephanie had set up some sort of gymnastics routine for Nathan, who trembled in fear on equipment far too large for him. This is child abuse, Jennifer said, filming everything. Benjamin, are you seeing this? The lawyer took rapid notes. The situation was turning into a legal time bomb. Richard stormed into the room and exploded. Jennifer, get out of my house right now. I won't leave until I know my children are safe. The argument escalated quickly. Jennifer screamed about paternal neglect. Richard shouted about trespassing. The lawyer threatened lawsuits. The three specialized nannies tried to continue their work amid the chaos. And the triplets? They were in total panic. Matthew vomited from crying so much. Michael had what looked like an anxiety attack, breathing rapidly and thrashing. Nathan simply shut down, going still and staring blankly. Emily had had enough. "Stop!" she shouted, with an authority no one expected from someone so young. "All of you, get out of this room now!" Silence fell immediately. Everyone stared at her in shock. "You're all educated adults, some with children of your own, and you're behaving worse than the kids you're supposed to be caring for. Get out, now." One by one, Jennifer, the lawyer, Richard, and the three specialized nannies left the room. Emily was alone with the triplets, who remained in shock. She sat on the floor and softly began singing the same lullaby she'd used on the first day. Slowly, very slowly, the children began to calm. Matthew stopped crying. Michael's breathing steadied. Nathan's gaze focused again. When Richard tried to return to the room an hour later, Emily stopped him. "No, you're not coming in here today." "What do you mean I'm not coming in? This is my house, these are my children. And you're hurting them. Everyone is hurting them. They need peace." For the first time since the whole situation began, Richard truly heard what someone was saying. Emily wasn't asking for money. She wasn't trying to sell a method. She wasn't competing with anyone. She was just protecting three frightened babies. That night, Richard fired the three specialized nannies. He told Jennifer she could only see the children if she agreed to family therapy. And he had an honest conversation with Emily. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to admit you're part of the problem and to agree to be part of the solution." It was the beginning of real change. Emily proposed something no expert had suggested: therapy for Richard with the children. Not traditional therapy with a psychologist, but playful sessions where he'd learn to interact with the kids without causing fear. The first session was devastating. Richard sat on the living room floor and tried to play with the children. Matthew immediately crawled away. Michael started whimpering. Nathan hid behind Emily. "They're afraid of me," Richard said, his voice barely a whisper. "They are, but fear can be healed." Emily began teaching basic techniques that seemed obvious, but Richard had forgotten, like speaking softly, moving slowly, letting the children approach in their own time without forcing. Progress was painfully slow. In the first week of the new routine, Matthew managed to stay 3 feet away from his father without crying. In the second week, Michael accepted a toy from Richard's hand. In the third week, Nathan stopped hiding every time he heard his father's voice, but there were still no steps forward. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. It was during the 4th week that Emily made a crucial discovery. She was organizing the triplets' clothes when she found a small blanket at the back of the closet. It was a light blue blanket, very soft, with little star embroideries. "Whose is this?" she asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Parker. "Oh, that blanket. It's from when Mrs. Jennifer still lived here. She used to wrap the boys in it before bed and sing them a song." "What song?" Mrs. Parker began humming a simple melody, a traditional lullaby about stars in the sky and peaceful dreams. Emily had a hunch. That afternoon, she placed the blanket in the living room and began singing the song Mrs. Parker had taught her. The triplets' reaction was immediate and surprising. Matthew quickly crawled toward the blanket. Michael stopped playing and listened to the song. Nathan, for the first time in months, smiled. "Mama," Matthew said in his little baby voice, touching the blanket. Emily understood. These children weren't just afraid of their father, they missed their mother. They associated that song and that blanket with moments of safety and love they'd lost. When Richard came home from work, Emily told him about the discovery. "You need to learn this song." "Why?" "It's a song my ex-wife sang. I don't want anything that reminds me of her." "This isn't about you. It's about your children. They need security. and this song represents security to them. Richard resisted. His wounded pride wouldn't let him sing a song Jennifer had taught the children. To him, it would be like admitting she was a better mother than he was a father. But the next night, the triplets had a terrible bout of insomnia. Matthew cried, Michael thrashed in his crib, Nathan couldn't calm down. Emily had left earlier, and Richard was alone with them. Desperate after 2 hours of trying to get the children to sleep, he remembered the song. He began humming it softly, without much conviction. The effect was almost magical. The 3 children calmed instantly. Matthew stopped crying. Michael relaxed in his crib. Nathan closed his little eyes. From that night on, a new dynamic was established. Richard began singing the song every night before bed, and for the first time in months the children didn't show fear when he approached their cribs. The emotional progress began to reflect in their motor development. Matthew managed to stand holding onto the crib for a few seconds. Michael crawled faster around the house. Nathan started pulling himself up on furniture, but they still weren't walking on their own. That's when Emily suggested something even more radical. You need to make peace with Jennifer. Never. She betrayed me, lied, tried to take my children away. And you yelled at her in front of the kids, threw things, scared your own children. You both made mistakes. Richard knew Emily was right, but admitting it was harder than any business negotiation he'd ever faced. The conversation with Jennifer happened 2 weeks later, mediated by Emily and a family therapist she had found. It wasn't a romantic reconciliation. It was a parenting agreement. Jennifer admitted she had hurt Richard with her betrayal. Richard admitted he had reacted violently and frightened the children. Both agreed the kids needed to see their parents in the same room without fighting. Jennifer's first visit after the agreement was carefully planned. She arrived on time, spoke softly, made no sudden movements. Richard stayed in the living room but kept a respectful distance. The triplets reacted differently. Matthew timidly approached his mother. Michael watched from a distance but didn't cry. Nathan kept playing but didn't hide. It wasn't a cinematic reunion, just the first step in healing a broken family. During the following visits, something interesting began to happen. With their parents in the same room without arguing, the children felt safer to explore. Matthew stood for nearly 2 minutes. Michael took a few wobbly steps between the couch and armchair. Nathan, the shyest, started standing on his own when he thought no one was looking. Emily documented every small progress, not just the physical milestones but the emotional changes, the smiles that returned, the curiosity in their little eyes, the confidence slowly rebuilding. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 3 months after Emily began working with the family, the most important moment happened. Jennifer had left about an hour earlier after a peaceful visit. Richard sat on the living room floor, putting together a simple puzzle. The triplets played nearby, each with their favorite toys. Emily was in the kitchen preparing snacks when she heard a surprised shout from the living room. She rushed in to find Richard with tears in his eyes and Matthew standing alone in the middle of the room. The boy had gotten up and taken 3 wobbly steps toward his father. "Daddy," Matthew said in his tiny voice, stretching out his little arms. Richard held his son carefully, as if he were made of glass. And then something extraordinary happened. Michael, seeing his brother embraced by their father, wanted the same attention. He stood up, held onto the edge of the couch, and took 4 steps toward them. Nathan, not wanting to be left out, also stood up. More cautious than his brothers, he took 2 tiny steps, but they were steps. At that moment, Emily realized she had achieved much more than just getting the children to walk. She had helped heal a family. The following months brought steady progress. The triplets not only started walking again, but began running, jumping, and playing like normal children their age. Richard learned to be a present and affectionate father. Jennifer established a visitation routine that worked for everyone. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 6 months after it all began, Richard called Emily into his office for a talk. "You saved my family," he said. "The $6 million I promised is yours." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "Can I make a counteroffer?" Of course. How about using that money to create a support center for families in similar situations? There are so many children out there who need help, and so many parents who don't know how to handle family trauma. Richard smiled. It was the first time Emily had seen him smile genuinely. Would you be willing to run that center? I would, but on one condition. You have to volunteer. Teach other parents that change is possible, that healing is possible. And that's how the Thompson-Wilson Family Support Center was born, an institution that would help hundreds of families in the years to come. 3 years later, Emily was at the center helping a new family with similar struggles when she got a call from Richard. Emily, you need to come to the house. The boys want to show you something. When she arrived at the apartment, she found Matthew, Michael, and Nathan, now 4 years old, running around the living room playing tag with their father. Aunt Emily! All three shouted when they saw her. Matthew ran up and handed her a drawing he'd made. It was a picture of a family. Dad, Mum, 3 boys, and a woman in a blue uniform standing among them. That's you, Matthew said, pointing to the figure in blue. You taught us not to be afraid. Michael showed his drawing. A big house with lots of children playing, and a woman in blue watching over them all. It's the center you made to help kids, he explained. Nathan, always the shyest, handed her his drawing without a word. It was a big heart with the word, "Thank you," written in crooked child's letters. Emily hugged all 3 boys, and for a moment she traveled back in time, remembering the day she first met them. 3 frightened babies crawling on the floor, avoiding any human contact. Now they were happy, healthy children, running and playing like any others their age. You know what? Richard said, stepping closer. You didn't just make them walk. You made our family walk toward the future. Just then, Jennifer arrived to pick up the boys for the weekend. Her relationship with Richard had never gone back to what it was before, but they had learned to be good parents even while apart. Emily, Jennifer said, I'll never be able to thank you enough. You taught us that family isn't about being together romantically. It's about being united by love for our children. As she watched the triplets say goodbye to their father without drama, without tears, without fear, Emily reflected on everything that had happened. She had entered that house believing her job was to teach 3 babies to walk. She discovered her real work was teaching an entire family to walk toward healing. The money Richard had offered had turned into something far greater, a legacy of helping other families. The Family Support Center had already assisted over 200 families in crisis, and every success story reaffirmed the lesson Emily had learned from the triplets. Love, patience, and understanding can heal even the deepest wounds. Years later, Emily would become one of the most respected child development specialists in the country. She wrote books on family trauma and emotional recovery methods. She gave lectures at universities about the importance of the family environment in children's development. But she always said she learned everything she knew from 3 babies in New York City who just needed to feel safe to take their first steps again. Matthew grew up to become a physical education teacher, always saying he wanted to help other children not be afraid to move. Michael graduated with a degree in psychology, inspired by his own journey of overcoming adversity. Nathan became a musician, specializing in therapeutic lullabies for hospitalized children. The 3 maintained a close and healthy relationship with both their father and mother. And every year on the anniversary of the Thompson-Wilson Family Support Center, they would reunite with Emily to celebrate not just the date, but the day a broken family learned to walk again. Richard continued working at the bank, but completely changed how he handled stress and pressure. He learned that professional success without family harmony was worthless. He became a more balanced executive and a better father. Jennifer rebuilt her love life, but never lost focus on motherhood. She and her new partner created a stable environment where the boys felt welcome and loved. The story of the triplets who stopped walking became a case study in psychology and education programs. Not as a medical case, but as an example of how emotional trauma can affect child development, and more importantly, how those wounds can heal with love, patience, and dedication. Emily always ended her lectures by sharing the moment Matthew took his first steps after months of fear. It wasn't just about a child walking again. It was about an entire family learning to walk toward hope. The apartment where it all began was sold a few years later. Richard bought a single-story house with a big backyard where the boys could run and play freely. In the garden, he planted 3 fruit trees, one for each son, and every spring when the trees bloomed, he remembered that just like plants, families could also blossom again after hard times. The Thompson-Wilson Family Support Center continued to grow. Other branches opened in cities across the country. Hundreds of professionals were trained in the methods Emily developed. Thousands of families were helped. But for Emily, the true measure of success was always the photos she kept on her desk. Matthew, Michael, and Nathan running on the beach, laughing, playing, living the childhood they deserved. The $6 million reward had multiplied infinitely, not in money, but in transformed lives, healed families, and children who smiled again. Whenever someone asked Emily what the secret was to making the triplets walk again, she answered simply, "It wasn't about teaching them to walk. It was about teaching the whole family to stop running from fear and start walking toward love." The story of Matthew, Michael, and Nathan became a symbol of hope for many families. It proved that no matter how broken a situation may seem, there's always a chance for healing when there's genuine love and a willingness to change. Emily continued visiting the family regularly, no longer as an employee, but as part of their extended family. She became the unofficial godmother of the triplets and one of the most important people in their lives. On the boys' birthdays, Richard always made sure to tell the story of how a young nanny had saved not just his children, but the whole family. And Emily would always correct him, "I didn't save you. You saved yourselves, I just showed you the way, the end." What a touching story, isn't it? The triplets managed to overcome their trauma and started walking again. But the most important thing is that the whole family learned to heal through love and patience. Now tell us in the comments, do you think Emily made the right decision by refusing the money and creating the support center? Share your honest opinion, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.